You don't plan to fall in love with someone who's already carrying another person's heartbeat. But life, I've learned, doesn't wait for you to be ready, it just throws you into the deep end and dares you to swim. I first met her on a Tuesday that smelled like rain and regret. I just walked out of a board meeting that had drained the last drop of creativity from my veins, and I ducked into a small art gallery in Soho just to breathe again. The walls were lined with pieces that looked like memories, smudged, tender, painfully honest. And then there she was. She stood by the far window, a brush still in her hand, arguing gently with the curator about placement and light. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose bun, a streak of cobalt blue on her cheek like a signature she'd forgotten to wipe away. When she turned and our eyes met, something in my chest stuttered like a skipped beat on an old vinyl record. Her name was Eli Harper. 25. Painter. Unapologetically herself. I was 35, a creative director at a tech firm, practical, composed, the kind of woman who schedules her feelings between 7 and 9 p.m. on weeknights. But Eli had that rare kind of presence that rearranges the air around her. She didn't seem to exist in the same dimension as everyone else. She was sunlight that didn't ask permission to shine. "Do you like it?" she asked, catching me staring at one of her canvases, an abstract explosion of warmth and melancholy. "It feels like remembering someone you shouldn't," I said before I could stop myself. She smiled, slow and knowing. "That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like." We spent the next hour walking between her paintings. She spoke about color like it was language, about emotion like it was currency. And for the first time in years, I stopped thinking about deadlines and started thinking about possibility. The next week, I found myself back at that gallery. Then again the week after. I told myself it was because I appreciated her art, which was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. There was something magnetic about Eli's way of being in the world. Chaotic, fearless, unguarded. She laughed too loudly, spoke with her hands, and treated silence like an invitation instead of something to fill. We started having coffee after her workdays at a small cafe that smelled of cinnamon and rain. I learned she'd grown up in Portland, moved to New York chasing the ghost of a mentor who'd once told her, "If your art doesn't scare you, it's not real." I told her about my corporate life, my failed relationship with predictability, and how I'd forgotten how to feel anything that wasn't safe. She looked at me with a kind of quiet empathy. "Maybe you were just waiting for something worth feeling unsafe for." I should have known better. I should have stopped before the edge blurred between admiration and affection, before I started memorizing the sound of her laugh or the way she chewed her lip when she was thinking. But one evening, under the soft glow of cafe lights, she said something that made everything unravel. I don't know how to explain it, but when you talk, I feel like I can breathe slower. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, like it was the most honest thing she'd ever allowed herself to confess. And before I knew it, I reached across the table, my fingers brushing hers. Just a touch. Just a heartbeat. But something in the world shifted. The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long sleep. We weren't lovers, not yet. Not really, but we were everything that word tried to capture. We'd walk along the Hudson River at night, our shoulders brushing as the city lights danced on the water. She'd talk about art and fear. I'd talk about meaning and loneliness. Every conversation felt like building a bridge between two lives that shouldn't have crossed but did anyway. Then one night, I found her crying in her studio. Paint splattered across the floor. A half-finished canvas bleeding red and gray. I didn't ask. I just held her. And she whispered it into my shoulder, her voice cracking open like porcelain. "I'm pregnant." The room tilted. I remember the sound of rain against the window, the faint hum of traffic outside, and the way her breath trembled as she tried to smile. It wasn't supposed to happen. I ended things months ago. I thought it was over. I didn't know what to say. My heart felt split between compassion and panic. All I could think was, this changes everything. In the days that followed, I tried to stay rational. Tried to be the adult in the room, the friend, the steady voice. But love doesn't ask for logic. It just grows quietly, in the spaces you thought were safe. Eli withdrew a little. She painted more, slept less. There were mornings when she'd call me just to hear silence on the other end of the line. "It's like I'm living two lives," she said once. "One where I'm brave, and one where I'm terrified." "You don't have to be brave all the time," I told her. "But I do," she whispered. "Because if I'm not, I'll fall apart. And if I fall apart, I'll lose everything." I wanted to tell her she wouldn't lose me, that I'd stay, no matter how complicated it got. But the words caught in my throat. I was scared too. Scared of what people would say. Scared of how easily she'd become the center of my world. One evening, about a month later, she invited me to her new exhibition. The gallery was filled with her latest works, raw, haunting, beautiful in a way that made people uncomfortable. The centerpiece was a painting of a woman split in two. One side bright and alive, the other shadowed and cracked. The title read, Becoming. When I found her in the crowd, she was standing with her hands behind her back, eyes searching the room like she was waiting for something she didn't believe would come. When she saw me, she smiled, that same quiet, fragile smile I'd seen that night. She told me the truth. After the crowd thinned, we stood alone before the painting. "It's about the baby," she said softly. "And me. And maybe you too." "Me?" I asked, startled. She looked up, eyes glistening. "You make me feel like I can still choose who I want to be." Something in me broke open. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then choose," I said. "Choose to stay. Choose to fight. Choose to let yourself be loved." That was the night everything changed. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. We didn't kiss. We didn't confess. We just stood there, hearts pounding in the quiet, the air between us charged with everything we were too afraid to say. But for the first time, I felt it, that strange, steady certainty that love doesn't always have to make sense to be real. The first snow came earlier than anyone expected that year. New York turned quiet under its weight, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I hadn't seen Eli in nearly 2 weeks. She'd stopped answering my calls, stopped sending her random midnight messages about colors and brushstrokes and half-finished dreams. I told myself she was just busy, but deep down I knew she was pulling away. So I went to find her. Her studio lights were still on when I arrived, flickering softly behind the frosted window. I hesitated before knocking, my breath fogging the glass. When the door opened, she looked smaller somehow, her oversized sweater swallowing her frame, dark circles under her eyes like bruises of sleeplessness. "Claire," she whispered, my name breaking in the middle. I smiled, careful and unsure. "You disappeared." "I needed to think," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The studio smelled of turpentine and cold air. Canvases leaned against every wall, some finished, some violently abandoned halfway. "About what?" I asked. "About everything." Her voice trembled. She turned away, tracing a hand over a half-dry painting, a storm of grays and white, a silhouette barely visible through the chaos. "I keep painting things that don't make sense," she said quietly. "It's like my heart and my hands don't speak the same language anymore." I wanted to tell her I understood, that sometimes love and fear are two sides of the same coin. But she turned then, and the look on her face stole every word from my throat. "I can't drag you into this," she said. "You don't deserve the mess I'm in." I stepped closer. "You don't get to decide what I deserve." Her eyes filled, but she shook her head. "You have a life, Claire. Career. You've built things. I can barely hold myself together. And now." She placed a hand on her stomach, the gesture both protective and defeated. "Now there's more than just me." Silence settled like dust. Outside, snow kept falling, slow and relentless. "Do you think I care about what people will think?" I asked. "Do you really think that matters to me?" "Yes," she said simply. "Because you're good at pretending it doesn't." It hurt, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. I'd spent years mastering the art of composure, of hiding my fear behind competence, my loneliness behind deadlines. She saw through it all like glass. I wanted to reach for her, but she stepped back. "I need to learn how to stand on my own," she whispered, "before I can stand beside anyone." That night I walked home through the snow, the city glowing faintly beneath the streetlights. Every step felt heavier than the last. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work, as if productivity could drown longing. But love doesn't fade just because you stop talking. It lingers like the scent of paint in an empty room. Sometimes I'd see her name light up my phone, and my chest would ache before I even answered. Her messages were short. "The baby's healthy. The doctor says I'm fine. I miss painting with you." I'd type replies I never sent. 3 months passed. The gallery that had once displayed her work called me one afternoon. "We're planning a spring showcase," the curator said. Eli's agreed to contribute new pieces. She mentioned you said you were important. The word hung in the air, soft but heavy. That was how I found myself standing again in front of her art, this time surrounded by colors that felt both familiar and foreign. Her new collection was called Afterlight. The first canvas caught me off guard. It was a portrait of two figures standing side by side, their outlines blurred into each other, painted entirely in shades of gold and blue. Hope and grief intertwined. The caption below read, "To the woman who taught me that love isn't about timing but about courage." I didn't need to ask who she meant. When I turned, she was there. Eli. Her hair had grown longer, curling gently at the edges. She looked stronger, calmer, but her eyes still carried that same storm I remembered. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." It was absurd how two syllables could hold so much history. "You came." Of course I did. We stood there for a moment, the crowd around us fading into a blur of laughter and champagne flutes. Then she said, "I'm keeping the baby." "I know. I thought you'd try to talk me out of it." I smiled faintly. "You've never needed my permission to be brave." Her eyes shimmered. "I was scared you'd hate me for choosing this." "I could never hate you for choosing life." The way she looked at me then, it was like time folded in half. All the months of silence, all the unspoken apologies, melted into that single gaze. After the exhibition, we walked through the city again just like before. Snow had melted into puddles that reflected the streetlights, and everything smelled faintly of spring. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things were simpler?" she asked. "All the time. And I think maybe we wouldn't have become who we are now." She laughed softly. "That sounds like something someone wise would say." I stole it from a fortune cookie. That made her laugh harder, the sound echoing down the quiet street. Felt like coming home. We stopped at a bench overlooking the river. The same spot where we'd once stood months ago, before everything got complicated. "I still love you, you know," she said suddenly. The words hit me like a heartbeat I'd forgotten I had. "I know," I whispered. I never stopped. For a long time we said nothing. Just sat there, two people trying to believe in the impossible, that maybe, just maybe, love could survive the chaos that made it real. Eli's pregnancy moved forward with quiet determination. She painted constantly, as if the act of creation was the only thing keeping her grounded. Sometimes she'd call me late at night, describing her dreams, colors and movements that made no sense but felt urgent, alive. "I dream of light," she said once. "But it's not white light. It's warm, like the kind that happens after storms. The kind that forgives everything." "You should paint that," I told her. "I'm trying. But it keeps changing." "So does life." She laughed, soft and tired. "You always know what to say." "Not always. Just when it's about you." The first time I felt the baby kick, I wasn't expecting it. We were sitting in her studio again. She'd finally let me back in. She was painting something large, something that looked like a sunrise trapped inside a storm. I was sitting nearby, sketching idly in my notebook. Then she reached for my hand. "Here," she whispered. I didn't understand until I felt it, the faintest flutter beneath her palm. A tiny, impossible reminder of life. Her eyes met mine, wide and full of tears. "Do you feel that?" I nodded, unable to speak. "It's like proof," she said softly, "that even when everything falls apart, something still chooses to begin." I don't know how long we sat there, holding on to that moment. The world outside could have disappeared, and I wouldn't have noticed. But love, no matter how gentle, never travels without shadows. As the due date drew closer, whispers began to find their way into the art circles, into my office, into places I thought were safe. Someone had seen us together. Someone had questions. "Is it true?" my boss asked one morning, his tone cautious but loaded. "About you and that young artist?" I didn't answer. He sighed. "Claire, you've worked too hard to what?" I snapped. "To be human?" He didn't say anything after that. But the damage was done. I could feel the quiet judgment that followed me through the hallways, the sideways glances dressed as politeness. Eli heard about it, of course. "You shouldn't have to go through this," she said. "Neither should you." "Maybe this is the price," she murmured, "for choosing something real." The night she went into labor, it rained again just like the day we met. I drove her to the hospital, heart pounding harder than it ever had. The hours blurred into a haze of sterile lights, muffled voices, and trembling hands. She held on to me so tightly I thought she'd break me, and maybe she did, in the best possible way. When the baby finally cried, something inside me cracked open completely. Eli looked exhausted but radiant, tears glistening in her eyes. "She's perfect," she whispered. "Claire, look." I looked, and I saw not just the baby, but everything that had brought us here, the fear, the love, the pain, the grace. "What will you name her?" I asked. Eli smiled faintly. "June. Because she's the first summer after the longest winter." I pressed my forehead to hers, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. In that moment I realized something simple and terrifyingly beautiful. Love isn't about possession or perfection. It's about showing up, even when everything feels impossible. And I had shown up. For her. For them. For us. Hospitals are strange places. They hold both the beginning and the end, stitched together by the sound of footsteps and whispered prayers. For me, that night, the night June was born, felt like stepping into a new universe. Eli was asleep, exhausted, her face pale against the pillow. I sat beside her, the baby in my arms, so small that the entire world seemed to shrink to fit inside her breathing. June's tiny fingers curled around mine, instinctively trusting. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. The city glowed wet, alive, endless. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear landed on June's blanket. I'd spent most of my adult life believing that love was supposed to be structured, logical, something you could build like a career or a home. But holding that baby, her baby, our baby, I realized love was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be lived. Eli woke a few hours later. The room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of machines. She looked at me, eyes glassy but bright. "You're still here," she said softly. "I told you," I whispered, smiling through tears. "I'm not going anywhere." She reached out her hand, weak but steady. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not running when it got messy." I laughed quietly. "You think I could outrun you?" Eli smiled, her eyes drifting toward June. "She looks like him," she said, almost apologetically. "She looks like you," I corrected. "The same stubborn chin. The same quiet fire." Eli closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her temple. "I want to do this right. For her. For us." "You will," I said, brushing her hair from her forehead. "You already are." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and soft mornings. Eli moved back into her studio apartment this time, not as an artist running from herself, but as a mother learning to rebuild. I helped where I could. Grocery runs, late-night feedings, the small mundane miracles that make up real life. Sometimes I'd find her sitting on the floor with June asleep in her arms, the light of dawn painting her face in gold. She'd hum quietly an unfinished melody that felt like home. One morning I asked her, "Do you miss painting?" She smiled faintly. "I never stopped. I just changed canvases." Spring melted into summer, and with it came color. Eli began painting again, slowly at first, then with the wild urgency I remembered from the beginning. Her studio became a playground of light and laughter, June's giggles mixing with the soft strokes of her brush. I spent weekends there, often working from the corner with my laptop while they filled the air with chaos and joy. Once Eli looked up from her easel and said, "Do you ever think people like us get happy endings?" I looked at her hair, messy, shirt stained with paint, eyes glowing, and said, "Maybe happiness isn't something that ends." She tilted her head. "You mean it just becomes something else?" "Exactly. Like art." She smiled, slow and thoughtful. "Then I guess this is our next piece." By the time June turned 1, Eli had a new collection ready, her most personal work yet. She called it Roots. The gallery was packed that night. I stood by her side as people moved through the space, whispering words like raw, transformative, brave. Every canvas carried pieces of her story: grief, rebirth, courage. At the center of the exhibition stood a painting of 3 silhouettes bathed in sunlight. A woman holding a child, another woman standing beside them, both reaching for the same horizon. The brushwork was gentle, confident, alive. The plaque beneath read, "For the ones who stayed." When I looked at her, Eli's eyes were wet. "You stayed," she whispered. "So did you." We didn't need to say anything else. The world around us faded, the chatter, the music, the flash of cameras. For a heartbeat, it was just us. Our lives didn't turn perfect after that. There were bills and arguments, sleepless nights, bad weather, and the occasional heartbreak that comes from being human. But there was also laughter, so much laughter and quiet mornings that felt like peace. We rented a small house near the Hudson, with wide windows and a crooked porch that creaked when you stepped on it. Eli set up her studio in the back room, where sunlight poured in through sheer curtains. I worked remotely, my desk cluttered with sketches June made on sticky notes. Every evening, the three of us would sit by the water, watching the sun dissolve into the river. June would point at the light and say, "Mama, look, it's melting." Eli would laugh, kiss her forehead and say, "Yes, baby. That's what love does." One evening in late autumn, after June had fallen asleep, we sat outside wrapped in blankets. The air smelled of wood smoke and apple cider. Eli leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you ever think about the first day we met?" "All the time," I said. "You look so put together," she teased. "Like you could fire a person and write poetry about it in the same hour." "And you," I said, smiling, "looked like you'd walk straight out of a dream I wasn't supposed to have." She laughed softly, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Do you regret it?" "Any of it?" I thought about everything, the fear, the judgment, the sleepless nights, the way love had dismantled every certainty I'd built my life on. "No," I said finally. "Not even for a second." Eli took my hand, threading her fingers through mine. "Good. Because I don't want our story to be one of regret." "It isn't," I said. "It's one of becoming." Winter returned quietly without warning. Snow blanketed the river, and the house smelled of cinnamon and paint. Eli was preparing another collection, this one softer, more abstract. She called it Lightkeepers. One night, I found her in the studio long after midnight, staring at a blank canvas. "Stuck?" I asked, handing her a cup of tea. "Not stuck," she said. "Just listening." "To what?" "To the quiet before it turns into something." She turned to me then, her eyes reflecting the dim lamplight. "You know, I used to paint because I was afraid of disappearing. Now I paint because I'm not." I stepped closer, brushing a thumb across her cheek. "That's because you learned how to stay." She smiled. "We both did." The day of her new exhibition, the gallery was filled with a strange golden calm. June ran between the guests, her tiny sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. People smiled, whispered, pointed. One of the paintings, a large, swirling piece of light and movement, stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't abstract this time. It was us. Eli and I, sitting by the river, our silhouettes bathed in the fading sun. June between us, her hands reaching out toward the sky. The title, Home. I turned to Eli. She was standing a few feet away, talking to a journalist, her laughter warm and unguarded. When our eyes met, she smiled, the same smile that had undone me all those years ago in that tiny Soho gallery. In that moment, I understood something simple but profound. Love doesn't save you from yourself. It teaches you how to live with yourself softly. Years later, when June started school, she brought home a drawing of our family. 3 stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. When her teacher asked who we were, June had said proudly, "That's my mom's. They paint and make breakfast and tell stories about light." I framed that drawing. It hangs in our hallway now next to Eli's first painting and the photo of the day we moved into our little house. Sometimes I catch myself standing there, staring at it all, and thinking how strange and beautiful it is, the way love rebuilds us one choice at a time. On our 5th anniversary, Eli surprised me with a painting. It was small, a watercolor, not her usual style. Just 2 hands interlocked against a backdrop of soft gold. She wrote one sentence beneath it. "Thank you for teaching me that love is an act of staying." I looked at her, my heart full. "You've always known how to make me cry." She laughed, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Then I'm doing something right." That night, as the house slept, I sat by the window watching the moonlight spill across the river. I thought about everything, the mistakes, the miracles, the improbable beauty of it all. We were never supposed to find each other. Not like that. Not through heartbreak and timing and everything that could have gone wrong. But we did. And somehow that made it all the more real. Eli stirred beside me, half asleep. "What are you thinking about?" she murmured. "About how lucky I am," I said. She smiled without opening her eyes. Me too. I reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Do you think June will remember this? She'll remember the laughter, Eli whispered. And the love. That's enough. Outside, the river shimmered, endless and quiet. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything to begin. It already had. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.